Islam Makhachev has spent years making the UFC lightweight division look easy. One opponent after another tried to stop him, and one after another. They failed. But now Islam has done something that could completely change his career. He's moved up to welterweight. And suddenly, the biggest question isn't whether Islam can dominate another fighter. It's this. What happens when Islam finally fights someone who is bigger than him? Because at lightweight, Islam had an enormous advantage. At 170 pounds, that advantage might disappear. For years, Islam's game has been brutally simple. Close the distance, get the takedown, control the opponent, and make them fight the kind of fight they don't want to fight. It sounds simple, but almost nobody has been able to stop it. That's what makes Islam so frustrating to fight. You can know exactly what he's trying to do, and still struggle to prevent it. And when Islam gets you down, the fight changes completely. Suddenly, your striking doesn't matter as much. Your movement doesn't matter as much. You're playing his game. And that's how Islam built one of the greatest winning streaks we've ever seen in the UFC. But now he's moved to 170, and that changes the equation. Because welterweights aren't just lightweight fighters with an extra 10 pounds. They're naturally bigger. They're physically stronger. They're harder to control. And eventually, Islam is going to run into somebody who can look at his wrestling and say, okay, try it. That's the test we've never really seen. What happens when Islam shoots for a takedown, and his opponent simply refuses to stay down? What happens when Islam gets tired trying to control someone who is naturally bigger than him? And what happens if Islam is forced to spend 5 rounds fighting on the feet? Because that's where this gets interesting. Islam has already proven that he can adapt. We've seen him fight elite strikers. We've seen him deal with dangerous opponents. We've seen him survive difficult moments. So this isn't about saying Islam suddenly becomes a bad fighter at 170. Far from it. The problem is that his margin for error gets smaller. At lightweight, Islam can make a mistake and still recover. At welterweight, that mistake could mean getting hit by someone who naturally carries more power. One bad exchange, one bad takedown attempt, one moment where Islam gets caught, and suddenly the entire fight changes. And there's another problem. Islam is no longer the unknown. Everyone knows what he's going to do. Everyone knows he wants to control the fight. Everyone knows he wants to take you down. Everyone knows how dangerous his grappling is. So every opponent he faces gets to spend an entire training camp preparing specifically for Islam Makhachev. They're not wondering, what does Islam do? They're asking, how do I stop it? And that's a completely different challenge. But here's what makes Islam terrifying. We've been asking these questions about him for years. And somehow, he keeps answering them. People thought his opponents would eventually figure him out. They didn't. People thought somebody would eventually out-wrestle him. They didn't. People thought somebody would eventually expose a weakness. And every time it looked like that moment had arrived, Islam found another way to win. That's why I'm not convinced that moving to welterweight automatically makes him vulnerable. It just gives us a completely new question to answer. Because Islam isn't entering 170 pounds as some random lightweight moving up. He's entering it as one of the most accomplished fighters in the sport. He's already spent years developing his game. He's already fought elite competition. And most importantly, he knows how to adapt. That's something people sometimes forget. Islam doesn't have to win fights the exact same way every time. If you take away one weapon, he can find another. If you defend the takedown, he can strike. If you focus on his striking, he can wrestle. If you try to make the fight chaotic, he can slow it down. That's what makes him so difficult to solve. But eventually, he's going to meet someone who forces him into territory he's never been in before. Someone who can defend his wrestling. Someone who can match his pace. Someone who is naturally bigger. Someone who can make Islam fight for every second of every round. And when that happens, we're going to learn something important. Not whether Islam is good. We already know he's good. We're going to learn how good he really is when he